Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It is lovely to be with you, whatever time you're listening to this, whether it's in the morning, the evening, the afternoon, September 2025. You could be listening to this in the future. It's always good to be able to record another podcast. I'm a little bit sun-kissed. I thought you might notice. If you haven't noticed, I've just got back from, when we're recording this, has got back from Tenerife. But yeah, Steve, have you been enjoying Tenerife or any equally pleasant holiday experiences?
Been to Normanton today, if anybody lives up in Yorkshire, which is about 20 minutes from me, to drop the kids off at a camp, and then I also put the bins out. So I've been doing all the adventures and exploration around my cul-de-sac today. So other than that, no, not been away. Took the kids obviously earlier in the summer, but I am I'm ready for a holiday, but I don't know when one's going to come. So we'll see. We'll see.
Ready for the holiday,
I'm crawling to an unknown destination or date. That is for sure. That is for sure. But yeah, life's good. And yeah, heavy into the 6 weeks holidays. But yeah, life's good. Thanks.
Love it. And we are pleased to have a returning guest. We sometimes don't invite people back, but this guest we've invited back. So it is great to have Matt Bromley with us. Some of you remember Matt was on with a co-author of another book, The Working Classroom, Andy Griffith, back in February 2024. It doesn't feel like that long ago, but it was that long ago. But it was a great conversation then. So, Matt, thanks for joining us again. For those people who don't know you, give us a little bit of an insight and then tell us what's been happening since we last seen you.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's a pleasure. And Steve, thank you also for sharing your exciting day, because I was starting to feel a little bit jealous of Ben jetting off to Tenerife. I brought the bins in today. The bins went out yesterday, so I just brought them back in, and all the neighbours' bins as well. So that's my exciting life, and looking after the kids as we head towards the end of the summer holiday. I am going to Egypt though next week, so I have got a week off finally at the last week of summer.
Egypt? Have you booked it and packed it?
Egypt, packed it. Yeah, I shall complete that. Yeah, we're looking forward to getting away finally before we're back at school. And since I last saw you, I got beard envy last time because of Steve. I don't know, if you remember last time, I had quite a bit more like you actually, Ben, a bit more stubble. So I got a beard envy. So since I last saw you, I've been cultivating the beard. That's what I've been busy doing. So I'm quite pleased to show that off today, because it's probably going to come off for Egypt. So at last, finally, I get to showcase it back on your podcast, which is great. You want me to say something about myself? Okay, I'm an education author, journalist and advisor with 25 years experience in teaching and leadership, including as a head teacher. And these days I do school improvement work and conferences, courses, contribute to magazines, do a podcast myself, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, that's me.
And yeah, I suppose an author and all of those different things that you've stepped into over a period of time, what led you to this time, and I suppose the space that you're in at the minute, what led you to from the working classroom all the way to where you are now, I guess? And obviously for those people who've never written a book, which is the vast majority, including me, obviously not Ben on the call, the process that goes into all of those kind of things, and was this already in the planning stages in advance and it's just obviously coming out now, or actually was something that you kicked off after we'd met last time?
Yeah, good question. So I before I became a teacher, when I left uni, I started out as a journalist. And as a kid, I always wanted to write. It's what I always did. I loved. I wanted to have a career in either journalism or some form of writing. So it was always there. But because we talked last time about our sort of working class background and upbringing, I shan't repeat all of that. But basically, money was tight. And so when I left uni with student debts, etc. Although I managed to get an internship on a newspaper, which these days would probably be more difficult, I couldn't afford to do the postgraduate qualification that I needed to get a permanent job. So I ended up going into telecoms, and then I trained to be a teacher, became an English teacher. And so it's gone full circle, I suppose. And so about 2012 is when my first book came out. I was a head teacher and I wrote a book about school leadership. And so from that point, the kind of writing's come back to the fore. So there's always been that passion, that drive, and I've continued to have sort of books on the go at all times. So to answer directly your question, when we spoke last, Working Classroom had just come out in November 2023. It came out, and I was working on a book just before that, which, as a true pro, I've got all of the books to show those who are watching this on YouTube. And it was called The Stories We Tell. And it was about using stories and storytelling techniques in teaching and leadership. That went on the back burner when I worked with Andy on the Working Classroom. And then I picked that back up again after that book was published. So that was the next one that came out. That came out in 2024. The one we're here to talk about predominantly today, show a book to those watching. Thank you, Ben. Ben's also got it for those listening to the podcast. Why School Doesn't Work for Every Child. I did start that after the Working Classroom, although, as I say in the introduction, it's actually a lifetime's work, because this is the first in a 4-book series about equity in education. It's about what we can do to ensure that schools are engines of social justice. It's about helping those with differences and disadvantages to get a better start in life, essentially. And that's been the undercurrent of everything I've done. And from the beginning of my career, certainly through teaching and leadership, it's been about how can we level that playing field? I hate that cliche, but there you go. How can we help the most disadvantaged, those with additional needs, those who are vulnerable or live transient lives? How can we help them through education to get a better start in life? So yeah, that's sort of the gestation of the book. That book, it's odd because when you start to sort of plug books on things, you talk about it, you've forgotten about it essentially because you did it so long ago. Ben, you'll know this. So I can't even remember when I finished this one, but it's quite a long time ago. The second book in the series has also been finished, and that's out in November of 25 as we talk now. So yeah, it feels like a distant memory, but I suppose it has been a lifetime's work to get this into print.
Yeah, and to be fair, I've had the privilege of being able to read this and thoroughly enjoyed it, actually, because when you have a title of a book that says Why School Doesn't Work for Every Child, first of all, that resonates with us as Edufuturists, because as many long-time listeners and yourself will know, we know it doesn't work for every child, and we've built a system that has been one size fits all, and we know that means one size fits none most of the time. And the book's obviously subtitle as well has got How to Create a Culture of Inclusion and Belonging. We're going to dig into some of the themes from this, but in terms of like inclusion and belonging, why does that matter, first of all? And what would you say is how would you define that for that inclusion and belonging piece for schools particularly?
Yeah. Just on the title, actually, it was a bit of a battle with the publisher, because the publisher, wonderful editor that I've got, is always thinking of positivity, of trying to ingratiate the books to teachers and school leaders, and I think the publisher felt that perhaps a slightly provocative title might not land very well, and it should be, actually, because the book is a practical book. It is about what can we do about it, what can we do to make school a more inclusive place. But I kind of stuck to my guns, because I did want to make that point. I wanted to say that actually it's not our fault. Teachers and school leaders work incredibly hard and always with the best of intentions, but systemically, education is not working for everyone. We can see that. As we sit here now, we've just had A-level results, we've got GCSE results coming out tomorrow, and we've just had an update to attendance stats, and all of the data still tells us the same things, which is things are getting better, but we are still leaving too many children behind. So yeah, this book, the first one is about creating a culture of inclusion and belonging. So to answer your question, Ben, in terms of why that's important, what it is, I argue that inclusion is the foundation upon which belonging is built. So another way to put that is that belonging is the emotional outcome of inclusion. So inclusion is not just about access, it's about active participation, it's about representation, and it's about equity. Equity as opposed to equality, which is something I argued last time we spoke when we talked about working classroom, because that's there too in that book, the difference between equality and equity. So it's not about treating every young person identically. It's about treating them equitably by doing more and or different things for those that might start with less or face additional challenges in terms of being included at school. So inclusion means that every young person in the classroom, regardless of their starting point, regardless of their background, of their additional and different needs, etc., isn't only present in the classroom, but is also seen and heard, valued and respected, and they can participate fully in school life, participate in terms of within the social and emotional environment of school. So they feel that they have a tribe. They feel that they can actually make friends and they can develop as a person, develop socially, emotionally, but also participate in the academic environment of school, in the curriculum, and learn and make progress, etc. It's also about making sure that young people feel safe and supported in school so they can develop those life skills that are needed and can access an increasingly ambitious curriculum. And it's about not just helping them to achieve good outcomes at school, which are important and open doors to their futures, but it's also about helping them to prepare for full participation in civic society, in life, in the workplace, etc. So, as I say, belonging's the outcome of inclusion. And when schools actively remove barriers and tailor their provision to meet diverse needs, they understand where students come from, what they already know, what they understand, and what they're bringing to school, etc., and what differences and disadvantages they have. When schools tailor their provision to meet those diverse needs, students begin to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. They begin to feel respected by their peers and by staff, and they begin to feel recognised for who they are. And that creates a culture where every student feels safe, seen, and supported. And the schools that do that prioritise inclusion, it's not just an add-on. There's not just an inclusion policy or an inclusion unit, but inclusion just permeates everything. It runs through the school like the letters in a stick of Blackpool Rock. They foster a culture of dignity and respect, of equity and fairness, of enrichment and aspiration, all of those things. And they do it deliberately. It's not accidental. It's through strategy, it's through leadership, it's through policy and procedure, curriculum design, delivery, pastoral care, staff development, everything. It all bleeds into that sense of inclusion.
It's a really interesting thing, and it links into a conversation we had quite recently about a topic around inclusion. And I think it's that whole thing of, people see it as an add-on or a particular tokenistic thing that they have to do on professional development day or a particular team, or an add-on, like you say, rather than it being driven through existing strategies and documents and policies and everything that you do. And I remember having this conversation around a very different thing of digital and education technology when everybody was writing a policy. I suppose very similar to maybe, and we're going off on a tangent, an AI policy. Everybody will have an AI policy. Everybody will have an inclusion policy. But actually, if you push it into and have the inclusion driven through everything else that's already in there, then actually it makes it more inclusive because you're considering all of those different things, belonging, inclusion, everything that you've just talked about within every aspect of anything that you've already planned and want to drive forward as well, rather than this thing of we're inclusive. Well, does inclusive mean that actually you give everybody the same thing, but those people that can't do that one thing get something slightly different? So you're creating two variations, 30% here, 70% there, and actually meeting the needs of probably none, as Ben often says, which is really, really, really key. And maybe if we delve a little bit deeper into not the inclusion bit, but that belonging piece. I mean, you've talked about loosely there some of the reasons why it's so important, but actually, I think I was talking to an organisation this morning in regards to learners and everybody feeling belonging. Community, we had Will Goldsmith on in regards to the importance of community at a school. And ultimately, if you feel that learners feel that they're engaged, that bought in with each other, connected to educators, but everybody else within there, they're more likely to thrive, stay, be encouraged, and actually go on and develop, whether that's the passing of a grade or just actually successful in regards to staying in school and actually actively engaging rather than passively engaging. But maybe if you could give us a bit more in terms of your understanding, because obviously you're well read and well rehearsed in regards to the belonging piece. Spend a bit more time there in regards to how does that link into and drive inclusion in every aspect then?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I agree with what you've just said there, actually. And I was thinking as you were talking about that, again, it might be cliched, but that image where you've got sort of three-panelled cartoon, and they talk about the difference between equality, equity, and inclusion. And you've got usually 3 or 4 people stood in front of a fence. There's a ball game going on the other side. You've got those people of different heights. Initially, there's the fence, and so only the tallest person can see the ball game. And then you've got some boxes for those that are a bit shorter, so they can begin to see the ball game. And then the fence has gone in the last panel, so everyone can see it. without having to make adjustments. Obviously, the goal of inclusion and of belonging is that what you said, Steve, which is that we make it accessible by default for all. We don't have to make changes. We don't have to remove barriers in order for people to access school. It's accessible to all because that's how it's designed. That's a panacea. I'm not sure we'll get to that. And so there'll always be the need of some reasonable adjustments, some sort of adaptations and so on to school life. But if we start with that in mind, that this is about inclusion, it's about access for all, then I think we'll do quite well. But actually, two things in answer to your question about belonging. First is, if I just talk briefly about EDI, because I've just written a piece actually for a paper about EDI, because there's a lot of talk, there has been in the last few months anyway, a lot of talk about it. We've seen in the US, President Trump, as soon as he got into power for the second term, started to dismantle or try to dismantle what they call DEI legislation. Here, not only are the Reform UK talking about scrapping EDI legislation in education institutions, but even the Labour government have talked about watering some of that down. I think that's deeply misguided, because it's not about positive discrimination, as some would argue. It's about providing the foundation of a fair and thriving environment. And equality, diversity and inclusion in schools is about belonging. It's about making sure that all students have equitable access to a high quality of education, feel valued as members of that community, and within the community in which they live and learn, they can participate fully. Those principles of EDI, which we often sort of just roll into one, actually do some heavy lifting. So it's probably worth just talking about what each of those means in practice, and then I'll talk practically about what belonging means. So the E for equality is about ensuring that everyone has the same opportunities. That's what you were essentially saying just now. It's about removing barriers that prevent some individuals from achieving their potential in our schools. But crucially, it's not about treating everyone the same, as I said earlier. It's about treating them equitably, accounting for those different needs or starting points. The D for diversity, then, is about celebrating the differences that exist between people, not managing difference or diversity, not accepting difference, but celebrating them, actually recognizing and valuing the varied backgrounds that our students and our staff bring with them to schools, because all of those varied identities and perspectives enrich our school environment. We are better for that. And the more diverse our people are, the more diverse our thinking is, and the better, therefore, the decisions that we make are, because there's more viewpoints. There's a range of perspectives that feed into that. So diversity is about celebrating, visibly, physically, repeatedly, celebrating the differences that students bring with them. And then the I for inclusion goes a step further. That's about ensuring that diverse individuals do feel welcomed, do feel valued, do feel respected, and able to participate in school life, and are then helped, as I said earlier, to prepare for participation in later life. So belonging is about everyone thinking, I have a place here, I have a voice, I can participate fully, and I feel comfortable. I feel I've found my tribe. So in the book, I share my sort of three-pronged, I keep changing how I term this, but three-pronged approach to belonging. And it starts with school-based factors, and then you've got home-based factors and learner-based factors. For each of them, and in fact, I'll signpost listeners to a free resource on my website, if you don't mind. It's at b-online.uk, and if you go to Beehive on the top menu, you'll find it there. You can download it for free, and it's a self-evaluation tool to help you to foster the sense of belonging in your schools, and it uses that process, but the three-pronged approach. For each of the three prongs, there are four facets of belonging. So you've got 12 practical aspects of belonging in total, and I've formulated for each of those a set of questions. There's 36 self-evaluation questions in all, which are leading questions where I really offer my practical advice in terms of what we can do, because I think there's a lot of talk about belonging at the moment, but it's often theoretical. It's about obviously we want students to feel they belong, and often that's because we want them to attend to deal with the absence crisis. But actually, we don't often talk about what it means in practice. So that's what I've tried to do with that. So just to give you an illustration, I won't go through it all, obviously, but under the school-based factors, you've got curriculum, coverage, and content, and that is about making sure that our content choices, what we teach, and then how we teach it, talks to the lived experiences of our students. Though our students see themselves in what we teach, in the examples and the analogies that we use, the historical figures, the whatever it might be, they see people like them. And I go further, because representation doesn't just stop with our curriculum, but it also expands to the people delivering it. So does our staff body represent our students? And where that's not possible, do we enlist community volunteers and others that can come into co-deliver our curriculum who do reflect our school community? Because if our students don't see themselves in what we teach and how we teach it and who teaches it, they might think, I don't belong here. This does not talk to me. I do not feel included. Therefore, I will absent myself, either intellectually or physically. I will stay away because I don't have a part to play. So it's things like that. There's loads of other stuff in that self-evaluation framework about the social environment, our consequence systems, our behaviour expectations, how we construct the social environment, etc., how we work with parents and families, all of those things. Actually, just on that, we'll probably come back to parents and community later, but just on that sense of belonging, parents matter too, because their families have to feel that they also have a part to play in schools. So I think little things like just flipping the narrative, stop thinking about how to reach parents and start to think about how to engage with schools. What is it about the school that is posing a barrier to these parents engaging with us? What can we do to change things? We can't solve all of society's problems, and I'm not suggesting schools should do that, but I think it should start with what we can do. And every conversation with parents should start with that in mind. What can we do to support you, to support your child? What can we change? How can we make school more accessible? How can we break down those barriers? I've waffled on, but hopefully there's something in there that answers your question.
For sure, I think that idea of taking responsibility as well from a school perspective, because there's almost... I'm reading a book at the moment called Thinking Clearly by Shane Parrish. Many of our listeners will have read it. And one of the first step he talks about in terms of really thinking is an acknowledgement around our own part in it. There's things that we can control and things we can't control. We know about those things. But from a school perspective, almost like, well, we are the staple, and therefore everybody has to come to us. And I had the same conversation, actually, a little bit tangential, but we've all done it, so I'll allow myself to do this. From a church perspective, I work with a few organisations that in that space where everybody, it's that you come to us and you're expected to behave in a certain way when you come into that space. You might have no understanding of it, rather than being, how do you go out into that space and how do you make yourself more, not attractive, but make yourself more accessible in that space? One of the things that I really like, and obviously tied into the ideas around stories we tell, and the stories that are in that space as well, is that the book starts off with two people, Thomas and Tommy. I like the idea that they aren't necessarily, I know they're fictional, but they're not fictional as well in the same way. They're very much caricatures, but they are very much what we'd expect or not necessarily. I say that wrong. It's not that we expect them, because lots of organisations will see one or the other. They don't experience both. Before you kind of tell us about Thomas and Tommy as characters and why you talked about them in the way that you did, there's a phrase that really landed with me in that part. It says, there's little doubt that Thomas will outperform Tommy at school, and indeed at every juncture of their lives, not because he's brighter or harder working, but because he started the race halfway around the track and has more expensive running shoes. And it hit me like a train, that, because I thought to myself, wow, what does that mean in terms of privilege? And then obviously the conversation that it means about how we can make school work for more. So tell us a little bit about Tommy and Thomas, if you would.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, well, just in terms of, again, the gestation of that, just it might a tangent again, possibly of less interest to listeners. But when I was working on the stories we tell and getting involved in how do we use stories and storytelling techniques in schools, we use it as teachers all the time, perhaps unknowingly. We tell stories, but how do we use it also in school leadership, etc.? I thought, you know what, this is a great way to really, well, as you say, to have that impact, to make this subject land, because we can talk theoretically, we can talk generically about belonging and inclusion, but what does it actually feel like to be that child? And so, yeah, I hit on this idea of actually telling the story of a couple of different types of students that we might have in our classrooms. And as you say, they are fictional, but only just. They are based on a number of students that I've worked with over many years. And Their stories are far from unusual. They're certainly not caricatures. I hope they're not anyway, caricatures. And indeed, their life stories are certainly not exaggerated. I could have added a lot more risk factors. I could have laid it on a lot more thickly. The difference between Thomas and Tommy. Thomas could have been privately educated, for example, something we talked about the last time with Andy when we looked at the working classroom about the 7% that are lucky enough to go to private schools, etc. He's not. He's in a state school alongside Tommy. Tommy could have been from an ethnic minority group. He could have been a traveller. He could have had SEND. I've not added any of those factors because I wanted to focus on one key difference between these two young people. So Thomas and Tommy, as we meet them, they appear in the second book, incidentally, as well. I'm following their lives. So in the second book out in November, we see them now at post 16 and we see what's happening to them next. But in this first book, when we meet them, they're both in year 11 and studying for their GCSEs. So Thomas lives with his mum and dad. Is very middle class, very privileged, but very averagely privileged. He's not hugely wealthy, and he's not, as I say, privately educated, etc. But he's lucky because his birth has afforded him a lot of opportunities. So they live in a nice big detached house in leafy suburbia. They've got a large manicured garden. They've got a home cinema, a study with more books in it than the local library, and they've got a heated swimming pool in the basement. Okay, they might be a little bit more wealthy than the average middle class family, but he's got those privileges. Tommy, meanwhile, is not. So he did live with his mum and dad, but his mum and him and his sister were recently moved when we meet them into emergency accommodation, and they're now in a temporary flat on the other side of town to where they used to live. It's got one bedroom, one reception room. The reception consists of a kitchenette and a threadbare sofa. There's a shared bathroom down the hall, which doesn't have a lock on the door. There's no shower. There's a leak in the ceiling. Tommy has to share the bed with his younger sister, top and tailing. His mum sleeps on the sofa. It's a very different type of home life that these two young people have. Their lives beyond their homes are also different. So Thomas has a busy social life. He's lucky that he's able to do lots of things outside of school. He goes to chess club. He plays tennis and football. He goes to debating society. He plays online gaming with friends. He's got a busy social life, and he's obviously very enriched. And his mum and dad are also present. His dad runs his own business, so can manage his own time and be there to taxi Thomas back and forth to these things. His mum works from home, so he's on hand to help out. He's got a private tutor as well, all of those things. Tommy, again, doesn't have any of those things. He's not made friends in the area that he now lives in. He doesn't like being in the flat because it's cramped and it's cold and it's damp. And so he goes out and walks the streets. He sits in a local cafe, a Polish cafe, because they don't ask questions. They let him sit there so long as he's quiet, and he can use the Wi-Fi, and he can get warm and have free water there, and so on. But he doesn't have access to things because he doesn't. The local library got shut down, the local community centre got shut down, so there's no outlet for him outside of school. Thomas, when we meet him, is intending to stay on in the sixth form of his local school and do A-levels, then to take a year out going travelling. After that, he wants to read economics at university like his dad did, and his dad can get him a job in the city and certainly get him an internship in his business, whereas Tommy has no idea. He's just consumed by the moment. He's feeling increasingly anxious. He's anxious about school, about homework, because he struggles to complete it to a good standard or on time. He's often late because he has to take his sister to school. He's worried about the state of his uniform, about the state of his own hygiene. He's not sleeping. He's not eating. He's worried about his sister, his mum, what's going to happen to his dad. All of these things consume his mental energy. So I do sort of tell the story in a sort of narrative form, but then what I tried to do in the book is say, so what? So what is the consequence in school for these two? And imagine you're the teacher with Thomas and Tommy sat there in front of you. What do you do to take account of those differences? Because if we treat them equally, identically, it's not going to work. As you said, you quoted from the book, Ben, we know that their births will become their destinies, that Thomas will go on and succeed. Tommy will not. He's unlikely to, as things stay as they are. But crucially, as I also say in the book, it's not about ability. And in fact, that's the phrase of the series. It's not about ability. They are equally able, or whatever, they're average or bright, whatever you want to say they are the same. Their IQs are the same. It's not about ability. It's about the accident of birth and the consequence of that on their life chances. So I hope with those stories, that, and I run them through the book, and I sort of talk about what that looks like, the impact on mental health, the impact on cognitive function, the impact on access to resources, all of those things. And I talk about what we can do for the Tommies of this world. And I make one just final point, which is, I talked earlier about the fact I come from a working class background, but I'm not sneering. I'm not an inverted snob. I'm not saying it's not fair that Thomas has all of these things. It's not Thomas's fault that he was born into a little bit more privilege and a bit more money and a bit more, resource. Just as it's not Tommy's fault. I don't look down on Thomas. I don't, resent him for having what he has. I just think we need to do more to share that within schools, to account for those differences. So yeah, that's why I use those stories, and hopefully it provides a useful hook for the book.
Yeah, and I think great stories within the book, but also it offers a model and a framework. I think it, and maybe if we step into that bit in terms of the ABC model, and ultimately how that model allows schools to have an understanding and more support for creating a culture of an inclusion, of belonging, and all that kind of thing. So I suppose best bit to start is, what does ABC even mean, other than everything else, and then let's go from there and dive into that.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll give you a short answer to this one for once, because I'm giving you such lengthy answers so far. So yeah, the model is ABC. Quick point on it before I give you the short answer is, I'm not suggesting that any of this is simple, and it's certainly not easy, but it is complex, it is complicated. But I do think in schools we need, if we're going to be strategic and really focused and get everyone in that shared space and understanding where we're trying to get to, then we need some kind of a framework to hang that on. So I've used the ABC as a starting point. The ABC is for creating that school culture of inclusion and belonging. So the A stands for attendance, the B stands for behaviours, and the C stands for community. That's the short answer.
So why start with attendance then?
Yeah,
Let's
okay.
go there. Let's dive into that then.
Yeah.
But like, if we're going to be going through that, we'll go through each letter. But I'm guessing it doesn't seem to be written at CBA, if not, and that comes across in a very different way, and maybe a different part of inclusion. But so attendance, why start with it then? Why is it so important?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it does start with attendance, and I think that's where we should start, because if students aren't attending school, at least not regularly and on time, then we can't help them to engage with their education. We can't help them to learn and make progress. We can't help them to feel that they belong and are socially accepted in school. And we can't identify any differences and disadvantages, vulnerabilities, and put in place the additional support to help them. So ensuring good attendance and punctuality must therefore come first. And attendance is also integral to building more equity in education, because disadvantaged students are more than twice as likely as their non-disadvantaged peers to be absent and persistently absent from school. We've seen, I'll sort of bring this up to date in a moment, but we've seen since the COVID-19 pandemic that attendance has plummeted, nationally and internationally. Rates of absence and persistent and severe absence all went up, and they have remained stubbornly high compared to pre-pandemic levels since then. We've seen sort of some green shoots recently. So just as we're talking in August, just a few weeks ago, we had the latest sort of data for the last full year, and compared with the year before, things have got better. So overall, rates of absence have gone down. Overall, rates of persistent absence have gone down. But severe absence has not. And the absence of those at-risk groups of young people, including those who come from socioeconomic deprivation, those with SEND, those who are vulnerable, have not improved. So we're actually seeing the attendance gap continuing to widen. So although, yeah, we are seeing some small improvements in terms of overall absence, those students with additional risk factors are much more likely to be both absent and persistently absent than their peers. So if we want equity, then we must tackle that first. We've got to get them into school. And it means that we need to understand why they're not. What are the factors that are leading to young people being absent from school? And the answer is it's complicated. But what I try and do in the book is try to unpack some of that complication, some of that complexity, to look at what I term it intersectionality. The fact that it's not just a case of, if you live in poverty, you're more likely to be absent, or if you come from certain minority ethnic groups, you're more likely to be absent. Actually, those things interconnect with each other. So if you have SEND, you're more likely to live in poverty and vice versa. If you come from certain ethnic groups, you're more likely to live in poverty and have SEND, and all of those things sort of fold in with each other. So it's about understanding that there are different factors, I suppose, that lead to a student being absent. It's not always as simple as, well, they live in poverty, therefore, or they have SEND, therefore. Some of these things do kind of layer one upon the other. So it's intersectional, but it's also multifaceted. Attendance is not usually the thing in and of itself. It's a flag for something else. So what's the barrier? What's the block? So in the book, I talk about anxiety and mental health being a factor. I talk about living in poverty being a factor. I talk about transportation and housing being a factor, as well as SEND. So it's really understanding all of that for each of our young people, understanding what is it that's posing a bit of a challenge, a barrier to them attending school. What's the intersectionality of that? And therefore, what personalised approach can we take to support them? I won't go into lots of detail on this, I promise, but there's a lot in this book on attendance, and I share my kind of mantras of attendance. So it's things like make every day count, make it everybody's business, make the benefits clear to all. And on that last one, it's about, again, flipping the narrative, which I mentioned earlier. Instead of talking in deficit terms about absences and lateness, it's about promoting the positive impact of good attendance and punctuality. And there are many. We know that those students that attend well in school make better progress and get better outcomes from school. They're more likely to go on to further and higher education. They're more likely to find meaningful and fulfilling employment and to earn more in later life. And they're more likely to have good health and well-being. So we sell attendance. That's sort of one of those mantras. And then we focus on, there's sort of loads of hooks in the book, but there's 5 Ps for attendance management. It's, I see if I can remember these now. That'll be embarrassing. Policy, personalisation, practice, performance data, then parents. Go on, you can test me. It might not be in that order, but those are the 5. So I offer practical advice in terms of your attendance policy, in terms of working with parents on it, in terms of using data to become more data-driven, more proactive, all of those things. So yeah, it starts with attendance, and there's a lot of practical things in the book in terms of how we might improve attendance, get them in, build that habit of attending school again, so then we can support them and help them to engage.
I am going to go a bit left field here. We spoke to Professor Andy Hargreaves recently, who I know you'll be aware of, and obviously the data is improving, but is still not where most people would want attendance data to be. He had this phrase, and I've written it down. I've kept it on my desk because I think it's really important to see. He says the opposite of absence isn't attendance; it's presence. And now we can, and you talked about this earlier about how people can switch off either by not attending and also switch off by being in school and it not being that. So I know that will tie into behaviours that come up in a moment. I'm wondering, off a tangent here, if we are maybe majoring on something in terms of getting people into school, into a physical building, is that the answer? And I know it particularly for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, I could understand why that was the case. But perhaps we're perpetuating a model of people attending a building 9 till 3, which isn't necessarily the thing that's going to solve the challenge of engagement and presence and making students. Is school the best place to do that? I'm not sure. And I suppose we haven't got loads of time to talk at that level, but I do think there's that provocation that needs to be just mentioned at this point.
Yeah, no, you're right. And actually, I do. There's it's either in the introduction to this book or the second book. I sort of start with a bit of a caveat, which is my definition of inclusion. I'm talking in these books about within the mainstream classroom, but I acknowledge that actually inclusion might look different for some students. And in fact, that might be a more hybrid approach where they are not attending a physical school building, or they are attending alternative provision that suits their needs. This is not, as you say, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach because we know that fits no one. But I am trying to focus in this book in terms of the mainstream school. And so by default, yeah, I think in order to build good habits, to help social and emotional development as well as academic, I think the ultimate goal should be attending school in person and then being present. And actually, I love that what you've just shared there from Andy Hargreaves, because it's exactly that. It's not just about getting them into school or having them online attending a lesson. It's about them being active participants in the process of learning, not passive recipients, because they could come in physically but not mentally and still be switched off and still learn nothing or still develop no new skills. And so presence is absolutely that. And again, without overusing the phrase in the book, I do talk about engagement, and certainly in the next one so this is about whole school culture. The next one I talk about what it looks like in the classroom, and the book's called Making the Classroom Work for Every Child. That's an exclusive for you on Edufuturists. It's not been released yet. Making the Classroom Work for Every Child, out in November. And that's about how do we engage students in that classroom through planning, through teaching, through assessment? How do we ensure they are active participants? So, yeah, I do agree. It's more complex than that. It's not just about physical attendance, although that for the majority is important because it builds good habits, not just for school, but for life. But it is about them then being active participants, being present, being engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, so we've done attendance, we've talked about all of those bits, but you also said behaviours rather than behaviour. So plural, why behaviours rather than behaviour as a part of the model?
Yeah. So the B's next, and it is the next stage, because once students are attending, at least more frequently and on time, then we need them to develop appropriate behaviours for learning. So the plural is essentially twofold. I know it's more complex, but I tried to simplify things in the book. So it's twofold. First, it's about students being helped to conduct themselves appropriately within context, comply with our rules and expectations. So it's behaviour in a traditional sense, conduct and compliance, and that's important. Although I do talk in the book about reasonable adjustments to those expectations and thinking much more broadly about what behaviour should look like and what those expectations should be, and engaging with students to co-construct that to some extent, so it's accessible to all. But secondly, I argue that students should also be helped to develop positive attitudes to learning and to develop a raft of behaviours for learning so that they can be present, they can be engaged, and they can access an increasingly challenging curriculum. So the attitudes to learning include things like being resilient and determined, having self-esteem, a belief in your ability to get better with hard work and effort, having a plan for the future, which provides a source of motivation, a sense of purpose, all of those things. So I suppose it's the character piece. It's about how do we help those students to develop those important life skills that will serve them well now and in the future. What does that look like? How do we identify what skills we want students to develop? How do we plan for that development? How is it taught and assessed? So it's not left to chance. It's not accidental. It's not in addition to curriculum knowledge. It's embedded in what we do in schools. And then the behaviours for learning, well, they take many forms, but they include study skills, things like note-taking, independent research, debate and discussion, self and peer assessment, metacognition and self-regulation, all of the things that we need students to be using now in school. Again, do we identify them? Do we plan and teach and assess them? Do we fold them into our curriculum and not just have them as additions? So yeah, behaviours plural. It's not just about conduct, important though that is. And also, it's not just about conduct in school, it's about contextualizing that, incidentally. So it's about preparing young people for future success, knowing how to conduct themselves in different situations as well, and code switch for, speak to different people in different ways, etc. That's appropriate within context. So it's that, but it's also about helping them to develop the skills to become active participants and to manage their own learning, become more independent over time.
I love it. And the C, then, is something that we're super passionate about. I say that quite a lot, but on Edufuturist podcast we talk about community, and I know that from building our own community and having a community of educators and people who have got a vested interest to saying that education can be done differently, you talk about how from a school's perspective community needs to be part of that, and you mentioned parents already, and we've talked about how it takes a village to raise a child multiple times. So what do you mean by community in this sense? And what have you written about in the book from that space for the ABC to be complete in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So once students are attending and behaving appropriately and positively, then the C is about community, because it's about building a community around those young people by putting family first. And as you say, we all know the adage, it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to educate one, because schools don't exist in isolation. In fact, I think you said this right at the top of this conversation, Ben. We are not alone. We are part of the communities that we serve. And the best schools, I think, and like the two of you, I'm lucky to get into loads of schools, and you kind of sense it. There's an aura and it's not easy to define. As you walk into a school, you know when these schools are doing something well. And those best schools that I'm lucky enough to visit, they reflect their local communities. They bring their community into their school and they take their students out into that community. And they also look beyond their local community, so they regard themselves as part of the national and international conversation. And they teach their young people how to be active members of their communities and how to be good citizens of the world. So, yeah, in the book, I say that community is about engaging with parents and families as partners in the process of educating their child, involving them, not just informing them on matters that pertain to their child's education and well-being. I argue that communication, therefore, should not be a monologue. It should be a dialogue, and it should always be marked by dignity and respect. So I say quite a bit about not pointing the finger, looking down at parents and assuming the worst, thinking, well, you don't care about your child because you're not there at parents' evenings, or you don't come into open evenings or answer our calls. There are a million reasons why some parents might find that impossible, and we need to understand that and then help them to support their child. Come back to what I said earlier, any conversation, instead of pointing the finger and saying, what are you going to do differently with your son or daughter, should start with, what can we do to help you to support your child? How can we help you? And break down some of those barriers. Understand that for some parents, they might have had an awful experience of school themselves, and they are terrified of coming into school or talking to a professional at school. Why? What can we do about that? For some, it might be the fear of an institution as well, a public institution that for various reasons makes them terrified. So it's understanding that, and it's then working in partnership with parents, not apportioning blame, but actually working with them. So yeah, I talk a lot about parents, talk about parent engagement, parent communication, about softening the edges of school to make it more appealing, about running more inviting events for parents, changing the language we use. Education welfare officers, attendance officers. I think I get sometimes we might need a sense of authority, certainly as an attendance officer, but you do sound like a police officer, and that might not be an open door to engagement with some parents. So maybe, parent partner, something a bit softer, a bit more kind of accurate in terms of what we're trying to do. So yeah, soften the edges a little bit in order to engage with parents. So I talk about that, and I talk about, working with the community to reflect. Go back to what I said earlier about curriculum, reflecting lived experiences. We need to understand where students come from, what they know and do, and their communities, their ancestors, etc. And then reflect that in what we do, so that they see themselves as a part of school.
So we've covered this book. There's another book. You called it out. You gave the game away earlier. So it's a 3-part series, and you said the title, Making the Classroom Work for Every Child. So it's out in November this year, and you said you were going to give us, and you've given us an exclusive, but we're going to be really, really greedy and say, give us a bit more of an exclusive and a preview, or what should we expect from the next one, do you think?
Yeah,
not do you think, because you wrote it. So
I did.
What do you think? Yeah, but
that's slightly fresh in my mind as well. But yeah, you're very kind to allow me to do that. So I did give the game away earlier. It's a 4-part series, this, for the Routledge, called Equity in Education. So book 1 we've talked about. That was about whole school culture. The second book, Making the Classroom Work for Every Child, out November 2025, as you said, is and available in all good bookshops, as they say, and online, is about what it looks like in the classroom. So I argue that every student, no matter their starting point, backgrounds, additional different needs, etc., should have a fair and equitable chance of succeeding at school. So I home in on inclusive planning, inclusive teaching, and inclusive assessment. So there's sort of 3 facets to this book as well. We've got the ABC in the first book, and then I've got these 3 areas of classroom practice that I dive into. So I look at how to make our planning more inclusive of every child, how to make reasonable adjustments and adaptations within the classroom to make teaching more accessible, and how to use assistive technologies and so on to make assessment more accessible as well. Some of it, you talk about curriculum being more representative. There's a bit more on that. Some of the stuff on teaching, about adaptive teaching or responsive teaching, perhaps is familiar to listeners. What really fascinated me when I was researching this book and drafting it was about assessment, actually, because it's something that I'd perhaps not thought as much about going into it. I'd done a lot of work on inclusive classroom practice, and then I'd not really thought about, well, how do we make sure we assess what students are actually learning and not put a block in the way of that? Because often we've got a one-size-fits-all approach again in terms of how we assess, whether that's the external assessment framework with, SATs and GCSEs and A-levels, with formal exams, etc., or whether it's formative assessment in lessons. We tend to follow a one-size-fits-all approach. We ask students to demonstrate their learning in the same way, but for some students, that poses a barrier to them. So we're not actually assessing actual burgeoning knowledge and skills, we're assessing how well they can fit into our assessment framework. So I talk a lot in the new book about that, making adjustments within classrooms in terms of assessing knowledge, but also arguing about a slightly more innovative approach to assessment longer term, including external assessment, say assisted technology, etc., but also a more sort of holistic approach to assessment. Oh, and also in this book, there's a lot on oracy and a lot on reading for pleasure as well, as two gateway sets of skills to level that playing field to ensure we achieve equity in education as well. So yeah, look out for that coming soon.
Yeah, very much looking forward to seeing that out into the world as well. I like the idea of what you've just said there, them last two bits. I like the idea of the book full stop, but I like that idea because I know that you're passionate about oracy, and there's the Oracy Commission, there's all the things that people are talking about being confident speakers. I spoke with a guy out in the Middle East, actually, who was saying they've got some incredibly technical, really talented people graduating, but they can't communicate their ideas, they can't pitch deck, they can't talk about who they are and why they've chosen it. They can do the stuff, but that presentation piece, we've got some work to do on that, which I know will come out in that book.
It does. And actually, just on that, I'm glad you said that, because this is not just about, I do sort of define oracy and unpack what it means, but this is not just about oracy, because as you say, there's a lot of other work that's happened on that recently, the Oracy Commission being one of them. This is specifically about using oracy to level that playing field, to achieve equity. And it's understanding that actually, I talk about accentism, for example, I talk about code switching, I talk about equipping disadvantaged students and those with other vulnerabilities and at-risk students with the skills to communicate more confidently and more articulately, to help them to level that playing field, to have more equitable access to opportunities after school, including university and in the workplace.
Yeah, love it. And we're very grateful for you coming on again. As Matt has talked about quite heavily, the newest book that's out now, by the time you listen to this, there might be another one out, so to make sure you get hold of it. Why School Doesn't Work for Every Child, how to create a culture of inclusion and belonging. It's available. We'll put a link in the show notes. Please do follow what Matt's doing and talk about that. There's way more in that book than what we've been able to cover in the last few minutes on this podcast, but we appreciate you coming on, Matt, and we also appreciate that you fighting this battle and pushing this envelope, because there's not a lot of people doing it. It's a tough one because you can never do right for doing wrong, can you? There's always, you open one door and you lift up one stone and you think, hold on a minute, there's a whole host of other things that I need to look at. But thank you for doing what you're doing, and looking forward to seeing the next set of books in this equity and education series.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Steve. Great to talk to you again.